Okay, I think I'm going to start. Welcome everyone to the. You know what? I didn't change the title of the slide to the EcoDistrict seminar instead of the Sustainability Advocacy seminar. The session code is correct underneath there. This is a AIA accredited presentation. So if you're an AIA member, you will be getting one CEU for this. Our presenters today are Christine Mondor, Grant Ervin, and Fred Brown. So this is the normal stuff from the AIA associated with this. Everybody's probably seen this slide before. The course description here, this is the same one that was sent out to everybody. Let's see, so we have Christine Mondor, Grant Ervin, and Fred Brown. They were the co-chairs at the recent summit from 2019, just over a year ago now, or just about a year ago now. And so this is sort of a follow-up to that presentation, or to that to the summit. So the learning objectives: learn what the EcoDistrict's mission and values are, learn how the Pittsburgh region is prioritizing the most pressing issues, learn how architects can build on past projects, policies, and programs, and learn how the borough became the first certified EcoDistrict in the U.S. So again, as I mentioned, here's our panelists, Christine Mondor, Fred Brown, and Grant Ervin. So, now I'm going to switch this over to Christine, and I'm going to run the slides for her while I pull up her bio here. So our first presenter is Christine Mondor. Christine is an eternal optimist regarding the power of design in shaping a sustainable environment. She has been active in shaping places, processes, and organizations nationally and internationally for 25 years through her work as an architect, educator, and activist. As principal and co-founder of evolveEA and a registered architect, Christine brings creative and strategic solutions to diverse projects like the nationally recognized Millvale EcoDistrict Pivot Plan and Buffalo Rain Check 2.0 Green Infrastructure Opportunity Report. Christine has taught architecture, landscape design, and sustainable concepts at Carnegie Mellon University, Slippery Rock University, and Chatham College. She serves as chair of the Pittsburgh Planning Commission, is a member of the Penn State University Stuckman School Advisory Board, and the EcoDistricts Protocol Advisory Committee. Christine is a registered architect and lead accredited professional and a 2019 AIA Fellow. Thank you, Christine, for presenting, and I'll try to follow along.
Thanks, Chris, and welcome everybody. It's really great to see, well, to kind of see you all here, but to all be in the same virtual space together. I'm just going to kick off what EcoDistricts have come to mean in the Pittsburgh region and a little bit of background on it. And then we're going to open up for conversation, and Fred and Grant are going to share some of the great work that they've been doing relative to some questions that the COAT committee asked us. So hopefully we're getting to the questions that you all have as directly as possible, and I'll just do a little intro. I like to begin this story by talking about something really big and really broad, which is how global capital markets look at cities. And this is a report that came out of a real estate investment firm called Grosvenor out of Toronto. And they, like many other places, are looking at cities and saying, how resilient are cities? And so I don't even know why I happened to be looking at this, but when I did look at this in 2015, I thought, I wonder who's at the top. And lo and behold, Pittsburgh is the second most resilient city in the US, following Chicago, and ranked number 5 globally. And that surprised me greatly. And so I dug into what they meant by the term resiliency. And resiliency we often think of as the ability to kind of bounce back, right, after an adverse event. But they define resiliency in their terms by two different things. It's the vulnerability of a place and its adaptive capacity. And when you look at what those terms mean and how they define it, vulnerability is kind of the kind of environment that you live in, the climate, environment, resources, the infrastructure. It's the place-based things, your neighborhoods. And adaptive capacity is the governance and institution and the ability that you have to kind of bounce back. So it's really important to think about resiliency, not just as the hardware of a community, but also the software of a community. And so always thinking about that, when we began this work with Fred, or actually early in 2010, we were looking at Pittsburgh as a shrinking city, and we were still on this map of shrinking cities. But we were also recognizing that Pittsburgh was at a pivot point, and that pivot point, whether you define it as weak market to strong market, or you know, pivoting in our direction, it was hard to believe, let's say in 2009, that the G20 would ever think of coming to Pittsburgh, for instance. But we recognized that attention was on us, and with attention comes capital and comes change. And so we really wanted to think about the kind of not just design as a technological issue and making the best buildings or the best neighborhoods, but really thinking about the community formation that comes with that, because we know that that hardware and software are both equally important. So what is an eco-district? An eco-district refers to a community or a neighborhood that commits to a holistic model of sustainability planning that empowers people to take ownership over their individual and collective futures. So there's a lot packed into that, and it sounds like common sense, but there are some very real kind of differentiators that make an eco-district different than maybe way we've done planning in the past, and sets the stage for how we as architects might produce our buildings. So let's think of it in a couple different factors. First, and fundamentally, and this appeals to all of us as architects, eco-districts are places, like a block. In some places, they're thinking about their eco-district as a block scale, or an entire neighborhood, and that's important. Eco-districts in Pittsburgh have been applied at a number of different scales, and Ervin is going to talk about the Eco-Innovation District in Uptown, but I'm going to start by talking about some of the very early ways of thinking about it in the work that we did with Fred and the Kingsley Association and the Larimer Consensus Group in Larimer. So eco-districts help communities plan for change and pivot when unexpected conditions arise. Cities always change, and oftentimes, more than we'd like to admit, those changes are unexpected, but hopefully we can begin to understand how things are changing, right? So in Larimer, this is a story that this community is particularly familiar with, but when you talk about this with other places in the country, they don't necessarily understand this. We know that our communities have lost population. Larimer is very much a part of that. In 1940, they had 13,000 people, largely with mostly residential and small commercial, a little bit of light industrial in the purple. We know the story. By 1975, their 13,000 went to 6,000. By 1995, their 6,000 was down to 3,000. Chris, there you go, got it, okay. And then by 2011, when we were really in earnest with the work with Fred, they were down below 2,000. And so it's not just the loss of physical fabric, it's the loss of community, social fabric. There are many, many things that are lost in that trajectory. But the community also recognized that they were at a pivot point, and so there's this kind of a set of strategies that help you really think about how to equitably move towards improving your community. For instance, like stabilizing and consolidating resources, whether that's making sure you know who's in the community, making sure they're involved, gather your social and cultural assets, as well as your physical assets. like understanding your vacant lot distribution and what kinds of housing you might have. Sorry. Then the next, as communities grow, they need to ensure that there's economic security and opportunity for everybody. And so that's a really big thing to understand, that as communities grow, there's a lot of capital influx into a community, and it's important that that be thought of in equitable and effective manners. Diversifying as communities grow, again, the timeline's going up, making sure that we don't have all our eggs in one basket. Our region learned that lesson in a very hard way, and so we want to diversify. And then lastly, when communities are primarily built out, you have a whole, it's not mission accomplished, you have a whole nother set of challenges that arise, and so understanding what those challenges are and sustaining them is important. And so within an eco-district, you're thinking about this change over time, but you're also looking at the character of the change over time and the kind of scale of how we think about these things. And in 1940, we had our eggs in the industrial basket, which meant that most of our systems, like food, water, and energy, were connected to that industrial network. And in 2035, what, together with the community we envisioned, we're still connected to those large-scale industrial systems, but we're also looking for other opportunities to close loops on site, whether that's stormwater, whether that's food production, whether that's energy production. And at the time, this seemed like pretty crazy stuff. But if you think about how far the city's come, and Grant and Fred can both talk about this, we talk about microgrids much more frequently. We talk about distributed stormwater infrastructure. We talk about urban ag and many other things where loops are being closed on site, and we're building resiliency through that. And the other thing that we found to be important is that communities don't just need one plan, they need a kind of playbook. So as the kind of challenges come at them, they're able to kind of look through that playbook and say, it could be this scenario, or it could be this scenario. And what do we have in order to be able to adjust to that? So a plan is not simply a plan or a singular vision. It's actually a playbook for how to adaptively manage the socioeconomic and cultural systems within a community. And so EcoDistricts in this setting emphasizes that it's important to kind of quantify performance, even things that are hard to measure, and to understand the flow of resources. So conventional kind of urban design work looks at things like, you know, urban form and zoning and those kinds of things, but looking at it in a dynamic way and not a static way. And I hope that Grant will talk a little bit about that in the way the zoning code in the Eco Innovation District works, in order to use this term, adaptively manage our communities. Well, we looked as part of this work in Larmar at a number of different past plans the community had done to say, like, what are these different strategies that they're doing with energy, water, and food, and how might this be organized? Because there's just a ton of stuff. How do you prioritize certain things? We put them all up on a wall and said, you know, sometimes they're changing light bulbs and sometimes they're planting a garden, but we're also talking about district heating and cooling and kind of urban watershed management, urban scale watershed management. And what we noticed is that these themes are organized by short-term and long-term things and scale. Can an individual do it, or do we need to come together as a community in order to do these things? And oftentimes systems that are a little longer in time and a little more coordination needed are kind of the right optimal scale, we call it optimal scale for some of these things. We're not talking about the huge industrial systems, but we're talking somewhere in the middle. And so those things take more time and need more coordination. And the community's ability to do that depends very much on their capacity, and defining capacity as can they make decisions well? Do they share knowledge? Do they have legal structure in order to act? And do they have financial resources? Means that the work that we do as, you know, in architecture or in urban planning is really enabling the community to build this capacity so that they can act at these optimal scales. And so eco-districts rely on community capacity. The process of planning is the race is really the prize. and communities, especially in our region where we tend to have less governmental controls, although people won't believe that, than most other places, especially, you know, larger cities or cities out west that have many more guide rails on how their communities are built and shaped. So we know that a lot of small, quick efforts are great, but larger efforts need community capacity. Oftentimes in our region, the community is the groundswell that's pushing towards larger system change, and that building those communities of action, whether it's around subject areas like water, energy, or food, or it's around geographies, building those communities of action becomes really an important part of the process. And so kind of what we've observed in our work in communities is that oftentimes there's unaligned efforts and there's a lot of great stuff going on. There's redundancy and not necessarily efficiency. Through the course of an eco-district planning process, we kind of sort those things out and understand where the gaps are. But then there's a whole part afterward where those aligned efforts need to be woven together. And where an architect fits into this is maybe at a building level. We often enter it from the kind of planning process level, but there's always room to understand where those efforts are in a community, help them build knowledge, shared will, and strategies, and then help fulfill that shared will and to really listen to what their goals are. So I'll kind of end with thinking about how this is being practiced locally and contextualize it in the national context. So last year, not even a year ago, 11 months ago, Pittsburgh hosted the 10th annual EcoDistrict Summit. EcoDistricts.org, simultaneous to the work we're doing, EcoDistricts.org is an organization of folks who came together to say, this is interesting work. What do we call this? What is it? Is there a protocol we can think that describes what best practices are? And so, you know, people across the country are working and thinking about similar things, and EcoDistricts convened the emerging, these folks to talk about it as an emerging area of practice. I had the opportunity to participate and lead some of the protocol development work, and Grant is currently a board member for EcoDistrict, so he can share some of that. But what came out of it was the EcoDistrict protocol, and the protocol is a kind of way of thinking about things that values that need to be in it, imperatives like climate, equity, and resilience, and categories or buckets that people might use to think about it: place, prosperity, connectivity, health and well-being, etc. And then how you implement it, because EcoDistricts is a process and not just a product or a plan. And so EcoDistricts.org is kind of helping communities understand this, and sometimes that's early, sometimes it's in the middle of their process, and sometimes it's afterward, and creating a kind of management framework and standards and enabling us to share with a common language what it is we're doing, because we're kind of inventing it. You know, I want to say that there are many organizations in Pittsburgh that kind of led to and contribute to this work and our regional propensity towards it. Organizations like the Green Building Alliance, like the AIA, like the former Community Design Center of Pittsburgh, and many others are participating in this work. So as a region, we're actually quite blessed with folks who are participating in this work, whether it's deliberately or kind of through fulfilling their own mission. So a little bit about the EcoDistricts organization is that in addition to convening, they provide resources and training and technical support. I think Chris Pager, who kicked us off, I believe is a EcoDistrict certified professional, AP accredited professional, convening and really kind of bringing this out there as a kind of global issue, aligning with things like the SDGs, UN SDGs, and other frameworks. So there are, if you're interested, there are foundation courses you can take. You can do it online or you can do it virtually, synchronously. Those are great if you want to learn more. Right now, there are there's a great deal of interest in this from around the world, interestingly enough, from around the world. At the time that I put this slide together originally, there were 12. There are 12 pending certified projects. They did not have any certified projects in the first two certified projects are Millville and Etna. Etna was first, Millville second, and Sharpsburg is lined up for the third. So that's exciting. They a little bit more about convening and some of their resources. And so I'm not going to go into detail on these communities anymore, but I'm happy to answer questions. Millville, Etna, and Sharpsburg, as well as the work that was done in Larimer and is reflected in the Uptown Eco Innovation District, were some of the first places in the country that really took this on and helped shape the protocol and implement it. And that is amazing. In addition to things, so Pittsburgh's like truly out there, kind of shaping the way nationally and internationally. In addition to that, things like the Triborough Eco District, which are kind of collective impact organizations that are helping us share when our regional governance system puts us in little boxes. Eco districts is a way for us to think in slightly bigger boxes. And so, you know, I think it's really got some legs in order to help us act more effectively in aggregated ways. And hopefully, you'll hear from the Etna Eco District team some point soon in their story about becoming the first certified eco district in the world. But today we're going to deal with these questions. These are the questions that the panel was given, and I think now is the time to invite everyone to participate. How can architects support and get involved with eco districts? What lessons were learned from completed eco district projects, and how will we apply them to future projects? How can eco districts improve neighborhood investment and growth? And then what is the city of Pittsburgh doing? And can you shed light on the 15-minute city title? So I will end that and hand it back over to Chris to moderate the conversation.
Okay. Thank you very much, Christine. That was very informative. I did want to correct Christine, though. I'm not EcoDistricts certified yet myself. So, but
oh, okay.
sorry about that. But I do want to introduce our other two panelists here. First of all, we have Fred Brown, who is President and CEO of the Forbes Funds, a supporting organization of the Pittsburgh Foundation, and a philanthropic organization focused on strengthening the management capacity and impact of community nonprofits in the Pittsburgh area. Mr. Brown has been a climate justice trainer, environmental justice leader, policy analyst, adjunct professor, dean of students, teacher, coach, mentor, certified juvenile justice judges trainer, certified conflict mediation and resolution trainer, master consultant, supervisor director, and executive director of nonprofit organizations since 1987. He has helped to rewrite public policy through the Transportation Equity Network that revised federal guidelines regarding public participation in transportation equity, and recently helped design a web-based environmental energy reduction tool that teaches community residents how to strategically and pragmatically reduce their energy use, creating models for green sustainable communities via the image Larimer software and the use of smartboard technology. A frequent speaker, trainer, coach, mentor, and consultant, Mr. Brown has a BS in education from Indiana University of PA, MSW from the University of Pittsburgh, and was a doctoral candidate working on a PhD in SW and MPH from the University of Pittsburgh. So welcome, Fred. I'll also get to Grant here. So Fred, you may have noticed I truncated your bio a little bit. I'm going to do the same with Grant here, just in the interests of time. So I apologize, I can't get to all of your accoutrements. So Grant Ervin serves as the Chief Resilience Officer and Assistant Director for the Department of City Planning for the City of Pittsburgh. Grant oversees the integration of sustainability and resilience into City of Pittsburgh services, programs, and policy. He works to make the City of Pittsburgh a smart, sustainable, and resilient city by fostering partnerships, leveraging assets, and finding creative ways to solve problems. Prior to joining the City of Pittsburgh, Grant served as the Regional Director for 10,000 Friends of Pennsylvania, a statewide sustainable development policy organization where he focused on land use, transportation finance, and infrastructure policy, and as a public policy manager for Pittsburgh Community Reinvestment Group. Mr. Ervin serves as an integrator by working across departments, agencies, and sectors to formulate sustainable and resilient solutions. He brings deep experience intersecting the world's environmental, energy, technology, community and economic development, and infrastructure policy to create innovative and sustainable solutions for the public, private, and non-governmental sectors. Anything else I should add there, Grant?
No, you're good.
Okay.
Good to be here.
So welcome to our panelists. Thank you very much for attending. Christine, you had mentioned that Fred would be talking a few minutes. Let's see, Fred, would you like to go first?
Yes, I will. Thank you, Chris, Christine, and I feel like Grant and Christine and I frequently do this, but what I would like to do is level set the conversation from my perspective so that people in the audience can get a sense of how we think strategically and pragmatically. If we look at what we consider in my field to be the next 4 flashpoints, income inequality in 2020, climate change in 2030, minority population shift to majority in 2040, and in 2050, 70% of the world's population will move to the urban corridor. These flashpoints for the city of Pittsburgh have a unique and distinct impact on our sector, as last year Grant and I and some other people from the mayor's office worked diligently to get the city of Pittsburgh designated as the 2nd U.S. city to adopt the UN SDGs. That moniker requires work, and the work that has been pioneered by the 3 people on this call is monumental in that it's very inclusive, transparent, and accountable. For us, over the last 32 months, my team and I have shifted our grant making to support this work to the social determinants of health and through reverse engineering the outputs to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. All these things are critical in this conversation because as we tee up what I call courageous conversations with architects, Christine and I over the years have been attempting to have conversations with architects about building living buildings, buildings that transform the way that architecture has existed. When you think about the role of architecture, it's transactional in nature. You have a design, you often come into a community with this idea, you draw it up, you share it with people, they get excited or they don't. A developer develops the idea, the building has a 100-year life cycle, you move on to the next project. But the people in that community, the stakeholders, the residents who've lived there for many years, don't often get to participate in the thought ideology from an architectural framework. And so over the years, what we've tried to do is create a condition for shared ideas that honors the cultural context of each community. Now that's very challenging when you consider the city of Pittsburgh is comprised of 90 communities. And each one of those communities are historically different. They have a lot of nuances that we have to look at. And so from an eco-district standpoint, one of the things we want to look at is how do we contribute towards making an eco-district within a particular city, and what are some of the small steps? And so in Larmer, which Christine is referring to, we did a series of small steps, some might consider big steps. We did a land use study and market study to examine the vacant lots in that community and the opportunity to look at how it could look differently. We also talked about exploring the ecological footprint. Given that Larmer has shrunk exponentially, what might be the appropriate allotment of people, in particular if we're looking at how do we create a mixed income community? So historically, developers have played with this notion of a third and a third and a third split. And then we looked at park edge development. How do we entice development around those particular areas? And for us, this became a challenge when you start looking at cultural nuances and how do we promote cross-cultural collaborations that really respect the community as stakeholders. So we began to really use the community sweat equity as a leverage point, and we aggregated that the community had volunteered over $1 million in time just in one project area. That allowed us to have a different set of conversations with the mayor's office, developers and such, county council, city council, who all played a role in the cross-sectoral application. Now, the result of this work is that in 2014, this particular community, through the work of Christine, myself, and others, was awarded a $30 million Choice Neighborhoods Award. That Choice Neighborhoods Award got that community, in particular those leaders, national acclaim, and it put them in a position to really drive their narrative and their story. Why am I telling you this? Because 15 community members, for the most part, drove this community effort in collaboration with multiple stakeholders. The other thing from an architectural framework that allowed this community to re-envision itself was the donated time and pro bono work Christine did with the community as an architect to help scale ideas that seem within the community's construct and reach. Once a community understands your commitment to their idea, it's much more easier to get them to look at the viability of those ideas in lieu of the architectural framework and the built environment. And so oftentimes you may come into a situation with a sense that I think we know what to do, and you might be right. But if you do it from a transactional perspective and you come in and you do what's right, you've left the community blinded by your perspective of what's right. And you didn't invite them into a shared learning experience to understand the nuances of why you chose or suggested a particular construct, design mechanism, or what have you. And so this notion of how we operationalize this work is really something I'm very committed to, that I often push Grant to really live out, is how do we really optimize our opportunity as a city? How do we optimize our opportunity as a global destination? And so one of the things we do through this economic gardening principle framework to help architects really build a firm foundation collaboratively is determine what the community's assets are. Use a strength-based approach to consider the architectural design infused with cultural relevancy. You know, what does this particular cultural group interested in? And then align those assets to create many ecosystems or learning pods where people learn more and more about this work. One of the things the Fed said to us when they met with the community before they were awarded the $30 million, they did a environmental scan, they did interviews, focus groups, and then they participated in community meetings. The Feds came back to us and said this was one of the most informed and educated community groups they've ever encountered. And, you know, we were very glad by that. That was an objective we sought to have. But let me be clear, that took 6 years to build that community skill set up to speak cogently about stormwater management, greywater reuse, bioswale cisterns, microgrids, all of these things that, you know, common people go to and from work every day and then have to tackle after work is totally different when you're living this every day and it's your job. And so having a level of sensitivity to that is very important. And then also, you know, us as pioneers of EcoDistricts work in the city, we have several projects that we could point to that are demonstrated ways in which the community can see the viability of that work. And so I want to pause there because the real thing I wanted to take from Christine's presentation was EcoDistricts in and of itself can put you in a theoretical framework that makes you think about all of the possibilities. At some point, it has to be tied down to certain realities. Those realities really have to be galvanizing realities that are catalytic. And you have to think through what is the most logical investment as an architect in an idea that will garner more community support for much larger and broader ideas that really galvanize the community and seek to make it more self-sufficient. And so one of the things I would ask architects on this call to think about is, what is the DNA that you can deposit in the community as an architect, as a partner, as a thought leader, that really allows the community to live on after you move on to another project and continue to grapple with the built environment. And so I think it's very important that we look at this notion that if a building on average has a 100-year life cycle, and I build it or I design it and it gets built and I move on to the next project, how did I leave that community? Did I leave them with a trophy? Did I leave them in a partnership? Did I leave them in a space where they can iterate? Did I leave them transformed? Did I leave them transactioned? Like, you have the ability to control that narrative. Although you might not always understand that, it is possible, and it does require time and commitment. But the most precious thing that can happen is people believe that this thing that is now built is something that they cherish and participated in, as opposed to somebody built something for me and now I'm living in it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Fred. That was a great presentation. I love the what is the DNA that you can deposit in a neighborhood. That's a great quote. Next, we'll have Grant Ervin from the city of Pittsburgh. Grant, if you would speak a few words, thank you.
Yeah, certainly. And it's always great to be with everyone. I feel like I'm in a bit of a board member crossover episode. So as Christine mentioned, I'm a board member of the EcoDistricts organizations, but I'd be remiss. I see Michelle's on the call too. I'm also a board member of AIA PGH. So this is kind of a great opportunity for my volunteer hats to kind of coincide. So I really appreciate that. One of the things, just to maybe start with kind of the first question, and just to leave with kind of Fred's remarks, one of the important pieces in the role of architects, I think, is really to be, in effect, kind of that translator between kind of the community's needs and the opportunities to develop the strategies that we collectively work together on implementing. And I think about that in the sense of just every time I'm with Christine and Fred, I kind of reflect on, the past 7-8 years of my life and how we've kind of intersected in different ways to make things happen, whether it's, sitting in some of the community meetings in Larimer with Fred and some of the early days of the Larimer consensus process with a different hat on. When I was at 10,000 Friends, to kind of the work that we've done with Christine all the way, fast forward to now as kind of the planning commissioner, and how we have this really unique ecosystem in the Pittsburgh region in terms of how this is all starting to play together. Just a quick pitch to Christine and Fred. I think there's a book deal here in terms of kind of piecing this together, because it is a unique story, I think, where we have been able to take these global frameworks, and we often get criticized in the city government for having too many frameworks and how do we kind of connect to these different frameworks. But it's important to understand that they each have a very special application. So when you think about the EcoDistricts framework, it's really about that district scale. Christine said it could be as small as a block, or it could be, a massive kind of neighborhood. And as a city of neighborhoods and as a community of small municipalities like Etna and Millvale and Sharpsburg, this is really a really unique tool that allows us to take kind of the planning technology of EcoDistricts and allow kind of the needs of residents kind of really grow from the bottom up, and then translate it into these kind of national and international targets like the social determinants of health and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So we have found a way, or we are finding a way, I think, in Pittsburgh to, connect the global with the local in many cases. And that could be from the building level to the neighborhood level to the city systems level. And so that's kind of, I think, one of the key takeaways I would have as an architect is to understand where this planning technology of eco-districts applies and how it can help formulate, in essence, a better product. And that kind of leads into, I think, some of the early questions too around like the factors of an eco-district. So there's some simple things like the physical geography, like that's the first piece. Like we have to know about where the place and space that we're talking about. But I think the second critical factor is this idea of a catalyst. I come from a background of community organizing for public policy purposes. So this idea that something is happening just doesn't happen, right? It's the choice neighborhood opportunity that Fred speaks about, or in one of the projects that I've been involved with Uptown, it was the conversation around bus rapid transit. And so for over a generation, the powers that be were talking about how do we connect how do we connect downtown in Oakland through some sort of transit system. But Uptown was always envisioned in those conversations as a place that you go through, not as a place that you go to. And effectively what we were able to do with a host of kind of partners was to flip that script, to have a conversation with the community who was vehemently against the idea of blowing a major piece of infrastructure through their community, and with just reason, to look at that infrastructure development opportunity as an opportunity, number one, but an opportunity to catalyze a greater community vision. And what you see in Uptown right now that has transpired as a result of the community's engagement in the development of a plan is almost $500 million of investment has taken shape in the form of a new district heating plant, in the form of capital for the bus rapid transit program, in the form of kind of neighborhood scale development, in the form of UPMC's investment in the Vision Hospital, et cetera, et cetera. And so what that plan has done is to help create certainty for the market and the environment to catalyze not just development, but high quality development. So that spark or catalyst really created kind of the organizing opportunity. And I think one of this, as you go into kind of what those small steps are and what the role of the architect is, two of the most important people that we had at the table were architects in the form of Christine and Stephanie Daines, who were a key component of the early think team that we took to the EcoDistricts incubator, which kind of leads to kind of Fred's point about the need to educate and kind of build the capacity of what's possible, and starting to benchmark ourselves against other districts, other cities, to understand what they're thinking of, and in fact that they're dealing with the same challenges. So in many regards, that education leads to a community organizing activity that then can start to conceptualize the development of what is the right scale of the district, what are kind of the tactical approaches that we can take, and then what are the additional capacities that we need to build or who we need to bring to the table in order for us to help realize that vision. Which then leads to, I think, kind of the third pillar is this idea of stakeholder engagement. And so understanding that analysis of, first and foremost, I think the built environment, the place, then starts to connect you to who are the critical assets, which are the people. And who are those people? Like Fred said, like it takes a small, quote unquote, relatively small group of people that can catalyze an effort like this. So you don't need, all 3,000 residents that live in the neighborhood, but just like any kind of organizing structure, it's going to be those 10 to 15 people that can help connect with their neighbors, help connect with the institutions to ultimately formulate a strategy. So then what we've seen over the past couple of years, and I think, in the Uptown case, one of the probably both undersold components of as we were developing the strategy, but now has become one of the most primary implementation, and this is like, I think, really critical, is thinking about governance. So in Uptown, you have the Uptown Task Force now. In Larimer, you have the Larimer Consensus Group. And so these organizing bodies really create a community capacity to help deliver on the plan and vision. So, the plan itself is, I think the process to build that plan is paramount, but then we have to work to implement it, and it's that governance structure, the residents, the commercial and residential property owners, institutions, the government agencies, the infrastructure stakeholders, that all become a part of that community delivery unit. And then that's how you start to move towards the implementation of the ultimate vision that the community built. I'll leave it at that. But it is, I just think, absolutely critical that this conversation is happening, because architects are really at the epicenter of being that glue, that translator in making these projects happen. I don't want to talk about the specific project, but there are several projects that we can look at a citywide scale, where the individual building is contentious, where the building project has become a contentious debate within the broader civic community. And one of the reasons why that has happened is because there hasn't been what I would call the EcoDistrict boundary built around it. And we see that. So if you can look at any kind of contentious building project, and this is maybe a good conversation, Christine, we could have over a beer, but like where things are coming into the process, but they come without context. And that is one of the things I think that it ultimately sets the physical building project up for failure in many cases, because they're not trying to achieve a broader community objective. They're operating in isolation. And that's one of the things I think that's been interesting, where we have had community planning, neighborhood planning, or eco-district work, that forum has the ability to mitigate some of those challenges, which is, I think, one of the great kind of contributions that eco-districts and neighborhood scale planning can offer.
Thanks a lot, Grant. That was great. So we have a couple minutes left to go back through the questions that we had originally generated. So I'm going to share my screen again so we can see those. And then I think we've touched on all of these. I might go to the last one first, because that's a new one to me. The 15-minute city title. I might take that one right back to Grant. Grant, can you comment on that?
Yeah, I'd love to. So one of the quick reflections, and I think we're remiss if we don't talk about the point and period of time that we're in terms of this pandemic. And I think, particularly as Pittsburghers, but we're not alone in this, if we think back to April, May, and the periods that we were in during kind of that, that tense period of isolation, we, in many cases, and have still managed this, returned back to our neighborhoods and kind of the places that we live. And so the 15-minute city concept isn't something new. It has a long history, and Carlos Moreno at the Spawn, is one of the original kind of purveyors of the concept. And we really got connected to it. I really got connected to it through our work with an organization called C40, which is a collection of cities around the world working on climate. And at that time, I was personally just kind of reflecting upon how I was, and my family and many of us were making a physical pivot to the areas around where we live, and how those services, because of the lack of the commute, into the center city in many cases, or to the distance to where we were working, has reverted around our home. And the importance of having kind of that access to services, to open space, is really one of the cores of the 15-minute city concept. And as we continue, into this kind of time and space, like we're going through you know, a major transaction, and this pivot towards neighborhoods, I think, is one of the unique things, particularly from a city perspective, as we've gone through a climate planning process, and we're now moving into the manifestation of a portion of that climate action plan with a comprehensive land use strategy through Forge PGH. And so as we think about the importance of connections, there is a huge leveraging opportunity in terms of how we facilitate access to opportunity, of how we address issues of racial and economic injustice, and how we also address the issues of climate. And so that proximity question becomes very important in that, in terms of civic design, and kind of how we manifest, you know, the public realm, as well as kind of, you know, picking up on what Fred was saying about urbanization. So how do we build a better connected city over the next, you know, 5, 10, 15, 20 years is really paramount to our survival. And so, you know, this is like an opportunity where we can take those lessons from this immense tragedy in the pandemic, and how do we create a sense of corrective action. And so the 15-minute city, you know, has been one of the things that I've been kind of leaning on, with regards to, you know, a way to kind of give us, again, you know, those North Stars that we look for and how they all start to weave together.
Thanks, Grant. Fred, I'm going to have you talk a minute, if you can, about the third question. How can eco-districts improve neighborhood investment and growth?
I love that question. I've always seen eco-districts as a multi-sector initiative that could be tied into the health and well-being of a community, using technology as a interface with Pittsburgh's trajectory as an artificial intelligence and robotics hub. I always thought the science within eco-districts fit squarely into the academic realm. And then also just the way that eco-districts works in harmony with a community's assets. I thought it also creates this notion of seamless intersection and optimizing the gifts, skills, and talents of a community. I think those kind of attributes make a building built from that framework enticing to the community because they see themselves in the building. Christina and I are planning commissioners. She's the chair, I'm a commissioner. We see buildings after buildings every 2 weeks, thousands of them over the course of our role on the planning commission. And sometimes I look at the buildings and I say, who would want to live there? And so there's a difference to me between who would want to live there and who has to live there. If there's a shortage of housing, people have to live somewhere. That doesn't mean that's where they want to live. That's what is available. And so when you take into account, I think it can improve the community both from the tactical application of it. I think it could be interfaced with schools to be a learning environment. I think it could interface with addressing climate change. I think it can address in Pittsburgh stormwater overflow issues. I think if there's 10 things a community needs, eco-districts can address 8 of them very squarely. I think with the advent of the work that is being pioneered out of Grant's office with the mayor, when we started this work, we weren't even being considered to be a UNSDG city. Now that we are, eco-districts projects really create a clear XY correlation with measurable objectives, trajectories, and arcs. And so if we think about how architects design an eco-districts community and neighborhood, it goes beyond the building itself. So it looks at the precipice at which other connective tissue of a community come together and provide it with a much more holistic delivery system that spawns new and innovative ideas. This is the challenge of eco-districts and the opportunity. And so I think that if we're able to really grapple with that, we can really get a real sense of the value of eco districts as a iterative idea and not one that's rigid, because the concept of building a building has a certain level of rigidity to it. However, this notion of building a living building that constantly interfaces with the community, and the community learns through this interface how to optimize the footprint of the building, and also begin to consider its external environment as another contributing factor. Now you've enticed the community to be part of the ecosystem of the eco districts and not just the building.
Thank you, Fred. That was great. Let's see, I think we have time for one more question. It is 1 o'clock now. Christine, I'll let you pick from one or two there if you want to comment on one of those.
Sure, thanks. I'm not going to get in the details. I could talk about lessons learned from completed EcoDistrict projects. I'm not going to get in the weeds, although that's a whole nother love to share with colleagues so we can learn from each other. That maybe that's a whole nother way we can get together and convene something. But I will say it this way, is that when you're out stargazing and you first walk out and you look at the sky and you say, there's the North Star, right? And then you begin to see maybe the Big Dipper. But the longer you stay there and the more you look, you begin to recognize that there are many, many more stars and many, many more constellations that you didn't see when you first went there. And as architects, we're often very only there for a little bit of time. Somebody's told us where the North Star is, and we say, oh yes, let me show you where the Big Dipper is. Let me show you where this constellation is, and then we leave. And I think that eco-districts as an ethos, as a practice, as a way of thinking about communities, looks at architecture as not just the act of going to find these other stars and see the things that we might miss when we just look quickly, but architecture is actually a telescope to kind of really bring into focus things that often are not seen quickly. And when we look at communities in the city of Pittsburgh and elsewhere, and we think about who's represented in the modes of capital that power our projects, in the profession of architecture, and in the way that we make and consume buildings, we often are working towards the North Star, but we are not seeing the myriad of other constellations that exist in a community. So I guess I think one of the things for architects to take away from this is that, understanding how to learn and how to see and how to listen and how to find these things and elevate these things is an equity issue. We need to have a long conversation about the role of capital and how the things that we do in our profession benefit some and not others, and how do we address those issues. I think it's a segue into a lot of the really powerful and difficult conversations that we're having across our profession and in many other ways. And so EcoDistricts is the beginning of that conversation, and I think it is something that we all need to continue to talk about.
Christine, I'm going to have to use your quote there. EcoDistricts is a telescope that can really discover the other constellations that exist in the community. That's wonderful stuff. Thanks. So we're just about out of time. Before we sign off, I do want to say that I'm hoping that this is the first of a 2 or 3 part seminar series on EcoDistricts. As one of Christine's slides, the second to last one, indicated, we're already talking to Aetna about potentially doing another EcoDistrict seminar, more specifically on the Aetna EcoDistrict. So stay tuned for that one. And then hopefully we'll have a third part of the series as well. So thank you all for attending, and thank you again to our presenters. Your information was fantastic. I do want to keep things close to 1 o'clock here, so I guess we'll sign off. Thank you very much, and have a good afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Meaning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.